Hello, everyone, and welcome back to our virtual Mishnah Berurah here. We're holding a Mishnah Berurah Chelik Dalet, and Mirz Hashem, today we will be learning Daf Reish Pei Tes Amud Aleph. We are continuing to learn the halachas of Rosh Chodesh. We pick up today on Reish Pei Ches Amud Beis, 2 lines off the bottom of the Shulchan Aruch, with Siman Tav Chav Ches Sif Dalet, continuing to discuss some of the technicalities of the Yiddish calendar. Today we're going to be discussing when we lane certain parshias and exactly how that falls out. Our learning today should be a schos for Achedek Beis Yisrael on the Sunnah Batzara Bashivya Ha'imdim Bein Bayom Ubein Bayabasha Hamakim Yirachem Alehem B'Yetziam Yitzar Lervacha Me'afel La'ira Mishubah L'Geula Hashta B'Agolav Zman Kariv and Emar Amen. Our learning should be a schos for Fuh Shalem for Achi Agadol Moshe Ben Esther Fradel Yitzchak B'Tzin Ben Dusha Rivka Bashir Aleach Havadasa Basriel Serel Yeshua Levi ben Ahuva Malkachana, Trani Bas Batsheva, and Yerucham ben Masha. They should all have a refuah shalom of B'Sayich Shar Chayle Yisrael. Says the Mechar B'Sif Daled, La'olam Kairin Tzaves Aharon Koidem Pesach B'Pshuta. We always lane Parshas Tzav on Shabbos HaGadol. So Shabbos HaGadol, the Shabbos before Pesach, we always lane Parshas Tzav B'Pshuta. If it's a year that is not a leap year. In a Shana Pshuta, when there's one Adar, U'Mitzaira, and we lane Parshas Mitzaira on Shabbos HaGadol, B'Meuberes. If there's 2 Adars, like there are this year, then we lane Parshas Mitzaira on Shabbos HaGadol. Now, before we go into the technicalities of this, there's an interesting Bir Halacha over here, Bir Halacha, Dibra Mastel Tzav Koydem Pesach. Chavetz Chaim says, why is this? Why do we want to lane Parshas Tzav on Shabbos HaGadol? Mipnei shebetzav medaber mehagolas kelim le'inyan noiser kodshim. There is an allusion to hagolas kelim, to kashering kelim, in Parshas Tzav. Where is that? It's in the Parsha of Noiser. It says in Parshas Tzav, the pasuk is talking about the basar of a carbon chatos. So there's parts of the carbon chatos that are eaten. So the basar of a chatos, if you cook the meat of the carbon chatos in a pot, so especially for those of us that are learning Masechtas Chulin now, learning Kol HaBasar, we're all involved in sugyas of tam ki'ikr, etc., etc. But when you cook basar in a pot, tam, taste of the basar that was cooked in the pot, is going to transfer into the walls of the pot. Now we know that a carbon has to be eaten within a specific time period. Once that time period passes, the basar becomes noiser. It's aser ba'achila. So when you cook basar kachim in a pot, the blios, the tam, that gets transferred into the walls of the pot, once the time period that's set for the eating of that basar passes, that tam becomes noiser. That tam is now tam iser. So if you want to reuse that pot, you need to kasher the pot. You need to get the tam of the basar kachim that's noiser out of the pot. So the pasuk in Parshas Tzav says, "V'im b'chli nechoshes bushala." If you cook basar kachim, specifically in that parsha, the basar of a carbon chatos, if you cook it in a copper pot, you cooked it in a metal pot, so the metal pot was baileya, it absorbed tam from the basar kachim, and now later on that tam is going to become noisar, it's going to become tam iser. The pasuk says, you need to kasher the pot. So there's an allusion to the idea of kashering kelim in Parshas Tzav. And before Pesach, we know that one of the things people are busy with is kashering kelim. So halacha wanted that there should be an allusion to the concept of kashering before Pesach, so we laid Parshas Tzav before Pesach. Now mathematically, that could only work in a Shana Pshuta, in a year that's not a leap year, in a year that's not a Mu'uberes. But if it's a Shana Mu'uberes, if it's a leap year, then we're going to lay Parshas Mitzaira. The Bir Halacha says that in Parshas Mitzaira also there's an allusion to kashering kalim, because there's another pasuk that says a klicheres yishaver. If you're dealing with an earthenware pot that absorbed tam iser, earthenware cannot be kashered. You can't kasher an earthenware pot, and therefore it has to be broken. It can't be reused. So again, we have this reference to kashering kalim, both in Parshas Tzav and in Parshas Mitzorah. Now, mathematically, how do we work out that Parshas Tzav should always be Shabbos HaGadol? In a Pshuta and in a Shana Mu'uberes, it should be Parshas Mitzorah. So I don't know if you ever thought about this, but the Torah Kedosha has 54 Parshias. Parshias meaning Bereshis, Noach, Lech Lecha, etc., etc. The Torah Kedosha has 54 Parshias. In a typical lunar year, in a Shana Pshuta, the vast majority of times, from Simchas Torah to Simchas Torah, there are 50 Shabboses, 50. Now, you're not going to have a regular laning on all 50 of those Shabboses, because you're going to have Shabboses that fall on Yom Tovim. And on Yom Tovim, you don't lay in a regular Sedra. So you have 54 Parshias to divide over not even 50 Shabboses, because again, you're going to lose some of those Shabboses. Now, Shabbos HaGadol is usually the 24th Shabbos of the year. Parshas Tzav is the 25th Parsha. So how do we end up with Parshas Tzav, Parsha number 25, being on Shabbos 24 after Simchas Torah? The answer is that we combine Vayakel Pekudei. By combining Vayakel Pekudei, now Parshas Tzav, which is the 25th Parsha, is going to be laid on Shabbos number 24. And we don't have to worry about Yom Tovim, because from Simchas Torah to Shabbos HaGadol, it's not Negea. There are no Yom Tovim over there where there could be a Shabbos that we don't lay in a regular Parsha. So again, Parshas Tzav, Parsha number 24, Shabbos HaGadol, week number, Parshas Tzav, Parsha number 24, Shabbos HaGadol, Shabbos number 25. The way we do it is we combine Vayakel and Pekudei. So that's how the 25th Parsha is going to land on the 24th Shabbos. Now that works in a Pshuta. In a Shana Mu'uberes, we're adding in 4 weeks because we're bringing on board another Adar. So now we're going to have another 4 Shabbosos. Now Shabbos HaGadol is going to become Shabbos number 28. So again, we're going to have this problem. How do we have that Parshas Tzav, Parsha number 25, should be laid on Shabbos 28? The answer is that then we're going to separate Vayakel and Pekudei. So we're going to pick up another laning, right? We're going to separate Vayakel and Pekudei. And then we're going to lane Shmini and Tazria. So now we picked up Pekudei, we picked up Shmini, we picked up Tazria, and Mitzorah will be that 4th Shabbos. So now Mitzorah will be Parsha Mitzorah. Mitzorah is going to be laid on Shabbos number 28, which is going to be Shabbos HaGadol. It's going to be before Pesach. So again, that was the first halakha here of Sif Daled. La'olam kairin Savas Aaron kaid Pesach b'pshuta u'Mitzorah b'Mu'uberes. However, the Mechaber points out that this is not always going to work. Chutz mi bahach Mu'uberes. This works with the exception of a Shana Mu'uberes, where the mnemonic of Heiches is in play, or the Ramah says Vahash Mu'uberes, or a Shana Mu'uberes where the mnemonic of Hey and Shin is in play, and we'll see what that means in the Mishnah Berurah. In those cases, Shekairin Achrei Mois Kaidem Pesach. In those cases, we're going to end up laying Parshas Achrei Mois on Shabbos HaGadol. What is this Hach and Hash? Let's take a look here. In the Mishnah Berurah says the Mishnah is Katan Vav. Mi Bahach Mu'uberes Hu Siman. This Behach, Hey Ches, is a mnemonic, it's a Siman. What does it stand for? Shahahei Moira, the Hey in Hey Ches, tells us Sheyom Rosh Hashanah Hayachal B'Yom Chamishi. We're talking about a year, specifically a Shana Me'uberes, when Rosh Hashanah falls out on a Thursday. V'aches Moira, and the Ches in the Namani tells us she'oisa hashana hoisa chasera, that year is what's called a year that's chasera. What does it mean that it's chasera? Ritzayda Loimar in the brackets, the Mishnah Berurah explains what the Mechaber wants to tell us is shecheshvain v'kislev hayushneim chaserim. If you remember, we spoke out that all of the months go in order. Chasar mole, etc., right? One month has 29 days, the next has 30, the next has 29, the next has 30, with the exception of Cheshvan and Kislev. Cheshvan and Kislev are variable. Sometimes Cheshvan and Kislev are Chasar mole, sometimes they're both Chasar, sometimes they're both mole. The Ches in this Hey Ches Mu'uberes stands for where the year is called a Chasera. If Cheshvan and Kislev are both Chasar, so that Cheshvan and Kislev both only have 29 days, and Rosh Hashanah was on a Thursday, then we're going to end up laning Acharei Mois on Shabbos HaGadol. Let's go weiter. V'Ramah Moisef, so that's what the Mechaber said. The Mechaber said that this rule, that Shabbos HaGadol is Parshas Tzav in a Pshuta and Parshas B'tzara in a Mu'uberes, works all the time, with the exception of Hach Mu'uberes, a Shana Mu'uberes, where Rosh Hashanah is a Thursday and the year is Chasar, meaning that Cheshvan and Kislev are both Chasar. The Ramah adds, and by the way, this is one of the rayas that the parentheses are a Ramah, even when it doesn't say Hagah, because there's no Hagah over here, and the Chavetz Chaim says here straight out, the Ramah Moisef, and the Ramah is adding Hey Shin Mu'uberes. What's Hey Shin? It's also a mnemonic. Once again, we're talking about a year where Rosh Hashanah falls out on a Thursday. But now we're talking about a year that's a Shlema. With the two variable months, Cheshvan and Kislev are both 30-day months, they're both Mole. And what the Mechaber and the Rambam are both trying to tell us is, Kishachal Rosh Hashanah b'yom chamishi v'ashana hoisa b'uberes, when Rosh Hashanah falls out on a Thursday, and it's a year that's a mu'uberes, bein she'elu achadashim shleimim or chaserim, whether Cheshvan and Kislev are both shalem or Cheshvan and Kislev are both chasar, Karen Parshas Noach b'Rosh Chodesh Cheshvan. We're going to end up laning Parshas Noach on Rosh Chodesh Cheshvan. What's going on over here? Very simple. Well, maybe not very simple. When Rosh Hashanah is a Thursday, Simchas Torah, which is Chav Gimel Tishrei, when Rosh Hashanah is a Thursday, Simchas Torah Chav Gimel Tishrei is an Erev Shabbos. Now, those years, people think about those years all the time, because those are the years that everybody's afraid of, because it means that we have to be Marvis Sedra, Parshas Bereshis in one night. Right? We have basically, we have Simchas Torah, we learn V'zayis HaBracha, that's Friday afternoon/evening, and tomorrow on Shabbos we're learning Parshas Bereshis. So in years that fall out that way, when Simchas Torah is Erev Shabbos, so Simchas Torah is Chav Gimel Tishrei, Shabbos Parshas Bereshis is Chav Daled Tishrei, the next Shabbos is Rosh Chodesh Cheshvan, and it's Parshas Noach. Now, what's notable about that type of year is that we're squeezing another Shabbos laning in between Simchas Torah and Shabbos HaGadol. We chap the Rhein another Shabbos, because the day after Simchas Torah we already have a Shabbos. We squeeze in another Shabbos. So that's going to push Shabbos HaGadol one laning later. And therefore the laning in such a year is going to be Acharei Mois. It's not going to be not Tzav, not B'tzara, it's going to be Acharei Mois. Umemela the Tais of Shabbos Achas Lakriya, we have one more Shabbos laning between Simchas Torah and Shabbos HaGadol, V'alkein Karen Parshas Acharei Kodim HaPesach, so it falls out that we end up laning Acharei Mois on Shabbos HaGadol. I'm curious, I didn't take a look. No, this year, right, not Negea this year, because this year Rosh Hashanah is on a Friday. Okay, very good. Weiter. End of the line, bottom line, and Reish Pei Chesam Beis says the Mechaber. Ula olam kairin parshas b'midbar Sinai kaidem atzeres. We always lane parshas b'midbar before Shavuos. Something else. There's another beer halacha over here. So the Chavetz Chaim tells us, the Mechaber tells us, we always lane parshas b'midbar before Shavuos. Says the Chavetz Chaim in the beer halacha. In my print, it's the bottom of Reish Pei Chesam and Beis, beer halacha dibra maskel ula olam kairin kaidem atzeres. Why, says the Chavetz Chaim? Kedei shela olam tafsik beparsha azois bein parshas b'chukaisai. B'chukaisai has a teichecha in it. And we want to make a separation between the teichecha of parshas b'chukaisai and Shavuos. Why, says the Bir Halacha? We want to distance parshas b'chukaisai sheyesh ba klalois ha-teichecha. Parshas b'chukaisai has the klalos, the curses of the teichecha. We want to make a separation between that ubein chag ha-Shavuos. Why? Shehu yom adin al peiros ha'ilon. Because we know that Shavuos, chag ha-bikurim, Shavuos is the yom hadin of peiros, of produce. We don't want any yom adin to be next to a laning of a teichecha. Shalo yikru ha-klaloi soimach lo-yom adin, v'yeloi pischid pela satan lekatreg chas v'shalom. The Lavush says somehow the Satan could worm his way in and act as a prosecutor and be mekatreg on Klal Yisrael chas v'chalila, that the curses of Parshas B'chukaisai should have an effect on the Yom Adin of Peres Elon of Shavuos. So again, the Mechaber said, "Ula'olam kairin Parshas B'midbar Sinai kaidem atzeres." Tisha B'av kaidem va'eschanan. Tisha B'av is always going to fall out before Parshas va'eschanan. Atem Nitzavim, Parshas Nitzavim is always going to be kaidem Rosh Hashanah. V'lachein, and therefore, Kisha Rosh Hashanah b'yom Beis Gimel, if Rosh Hashanah is on a Monday or a Tuesday, sheyesh shtei Shabbos paid Rosh Hashanah l'Sukkos. If Rosh Hashanah is on a Monday or a Tuesday, you're going to have two Shabbos to lane on between Rosh Hashanah and Sukkos. And then tzrichim lechalik nitzavim vayelech, we have to divide up nitzavim and vayelech, kedei sheyikru vayelech bein Rosh Hashanah l'Tzom Kippur, so that we should reserve vayelech for the Shabbos that's going to be between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. Nitzavim will be the Shabbos before Rosh Hashanah. Vayelech will be the Shabbos between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. Shabbos Shuvah. The Ha'azinu bein Tzom Kippur l'Sukkos, and we will reserve Parshas V'Hazinu to be between Yom Kippur and Sukkos. For Siman, we have a mnemonic for all of this. Bag HaMelech Pas Vayelech. What does that mean? So I'll give you a heads up what the Mishnah Berurah is going to say. Bag HaMelech, if HaMelech, Rosh Hashanah, when we celebrate and proclaim the Malchus of the Rabbeinu Shalom, is Monday or Tuesday, Pas Vayelech. We break up Vayelech. How does Pas? You see Pas, you think bread. Pasai Saisa Pitim. The Pasuk discussing the Karban Mincha says, Pasai Saisa Pitim. We have to break it up into pieces. So Bag HaMelech, when HaMelech, Rosh Hashanah, is Monday or Tuesday, Pas Vayelech, we have to separate Vayelech from Nitzavim. Aval Kisha Rosh Hashanah b'yom Hevav, but if Rosh Hashanah is on a Thursday or a Friday, Oz Ein Bein Rosh Hashanah Lo Sukkos Ela Shabbos Achas. Then you only end up having one Shabbos between Rosh Hashanah and Sukkos, Shekarin Ba Ha'azinu, and that's when you'll lane Ha'azinu. Oz Vayelech im Nitzavim, Kainim Rosh Hashanah, so then you'll have Nitzavim and Vayelech together before Rosh Hashanah. V'simin l'pshuta, it comes out that useful simin for Shana Pshuta is Pakdu upischu. Pakdu is a lashon of command. Pekoid, to command. Tzav, Parshas Tzav. Tzav means to command. Pikdu, so you're Tzav, upischu, and then have Pesach. Because on a Shana Pshuta you have Parshas Tzav. Excuse me, I Shabbos HaGadol before Pesach. V'lim uberes, and for a leap year, what's the siman? Sigru upischu, close up and make Pesach, because we know that a mitzvah is sometimes a mitzvah muskar. Sometimes a Mitzvah has to be locked up while we're trying to decide if he's a true Mitzvah or not. Minu, count, v'itzru, and then make Atzeres. Parshas Bamidbar, where we have counting of Klal Yisrael, is before Atzeres, before Shavuos. Tzumu, fast, vitzalu, and then pray. What's that a reference to? Tisha B'Av, which is a tzayim. Tisha B'Av is a fast. It always has to come before V'eschanan, which is when Moshe Rabbeinu was mispalel, when he davened. Kumu, get up. V'tiku, and blow shofar. Kumu is a reference to nitzavim. Atem nitzavim ayoim. You are standing here. You are erect. Atem nitzavim hayoim. Parshas Nitzavim, kumu, standing erect, is a reference to Parshas Nitzavim, v'tiku, and then blow shofar. Nitzavim comes before Rosh Hashanah. Says the Mishnah Berurah, Cotton Zion, B'yam Bag, Ritzayin Alarm, Shachal Yom Rishon, Shal Rosh Hashanah, B'yam Sheni, B'yam Shlishi. That's a reference to when Rosh Hashanah falls out on a Monday or a Tuesday. Ches Bag HaMelech Pas Vayelech, Pirush HaMelech. What does it mean, Bag HaMelech? Hainu Rosh Hashanah. She'omrim HaMelech HaMishpat. Kishachal B'yam Sheni or Shlishi. If it falls out on Monday or Thursday, Pas Vayelech. Break up Vayelech. Miloshan Pasei Seisa Pitim. Break it up into pieces. Shemachalkim Nitzavim Vayelech L'shtayim. We separate Nitzavim Vayelech into two parshas. Ice cut and test. Kisha Rosh Hashanah B'yom Hezayin. If Rosh Hashanah is on a Friday or on a Shabbos. Kain Tzarech Loimar. Yes, it has to be Kirish Rosh Hashanah B'yom Hezayin, not Hey Vav. Kain Tzarech Loimar. V'chein Issa B'Torah B'Sifrei Shulchan Aruch Yishanim. When Rosh Hashanah falls out on Thursday or on Shabbos, to be Shishi Eyav Shalachol, it can't be a Vav because Loi Badu, Rosh. Rosh Hashanah cannot be on Vav. It can't be on Erev Shabbos. Aizkan Yud, Piktu, Pischu, Piktu, Lashon Tzavu. It's a lashon of command. Kalaymer Tzav, Kairin Samach LePesach. We always laid Parshas Tzav before Pesach. Sigru, lashon Mitzara Musgar. Sigru is a reference to a Mitzara Musgar, a Mitzara who's been closeted, a Mitzara who's been locked away while we wait to see if his affliction, if his nega grows and it's going to become a true tzaras or not. In the meantime, he's, so to speak, locked away. Menu v'itzru, count, and itzru, pirush b'midbar, shu minyan b'nei Yisrael kaidem atzeres. Menu is a reference to Parshas Bamidbar, where there was a counting of Klal Yisrael. Tzumu, hainu Tisha B'Av. Tzumu, fasting, is a reference to Tisha B'Av, which is, of course, a fast day. V'tzalu, hainu v'eschanan. Tzalu, a lashon of tefillah, is a reference to v'eschanan, when Moshe Rabbeinu was mispalo. Kumu v'tiku, hainu nitzavim. Kumu is a reference to Parshas Nitzavim. Kaidem tekiyas, Rosh Hashanah. It becomes before the shofar blowing of Rosh Hashanah. Kishachal Yom Rishon Shal Pesach b'Shabbos, when the first day of Pesach falls out on Shabbos. Da'az b'nei Eretz Yisrael she'osid Pesach rak shiva yomim karmi b'Shabbos she'achar Parsha Shmini. When the first day of Pesach falls out on Shabbos, then in Eretz Yisrael they're going to pick up an additional Shabbos to lean on, right? Because they don't have 2 days Yom Tov. So they're going to have Shvi Shal Pesach, and then they're going to have a Shabbos, which we're not going to have at Chutz La'aretz. By us, it's going to be Achrid Shal Pesach. It's going to be a Yom Tov. We're not going to lane a regular Parsha. But in Eretz Yisrael, they will. So they're going to be a Parsha ahead of us. So they're going to lane Parsha Shmini. They're going to end up short a Parsha before the next Simchas Torah. So they split up Tazria and Mitzrayra. Some of them split up Bahar and Bechukaisai. That's from the Maharit in the Magen Avram. I think I misspoke a second ago. I said that in Eretz Yisrael they're going to be short a Shabbos. It's not that they're going to be short a Shabbos. They're going to be short a Kriya. In other words, they're getting in one more regular Shabbos Kriya than we are here in Chutz La'aretz, right? Because in Chutz La'aretz, we're going to have Akrid Shal Pesach, where we're not going to lay in a regular Kriya. In Eretz Yisrael, it's going to be a regular Shabbos, and they're going to be laying Parsha Shmini on that Shabbos. so they're short a kriya. So how do they make up the kriya? They separate either Tazria and Mitzayra, or they separate Bahar and Bechul Kaisai. Moving along to Sifhei. Says the Mechaber, Parshas Ha'azinu. When it comes to Parshas Ha'azinu, we have a little bit of an aberration in how we divide up the aliyahs. We break one of the rules of breaking up aliyahs. One of the rules of breaking up aliyahs is that an aliyah is supposed to begin and end on a positive note, meaning that it cannot begin or end on a negative note. We don't begin or end a laning with something that's negative. In Parshas Hazinu, we break that rule. So, for example, if you take a quick look at Parshas Hazinu, you'll see that, for instance, Shlishi. We end off Shlishi, Tzur Yaladecha Teshi Vatishkach Kel Mechaylaleka. This is Musar to Klal Yisrael, where we're saying that you forgot Tzur Yaladecha, Chas v'Chalila. You forgot the Rabbeinu Shalom, the rock that gave rise to you and took care of you. Vatishkach Kel Mechaylaleka. You, so to speak, forgot Hashem, who formed you and takes care of you and everything else. Now that's negative. That's not a positive. Yet we're ending the aliyah that way. So this is an aberration, really, from the rules of how we break up aliyahs. Says the Mechaber, Parshas Hazinu, Mechalkin Parshi Yosea, Kederech Shoyu Mechalkin Oisa B'Mikdash. We break up the aliyahs of Parshas Hazinu the way they were broken up in the Beis Hamikdash. What does that mean? Explains the Mechaber, Shahayu Kairin Hashira Pam Achas L'Sheishes Yemei Hashavua. The laning of Parshas Hazinu was broken up into 6 aliyahs. And it's not clear in the Mechaber, and I'm a little surprised that the Chavetz Chaim chose not to spell it out. But from the Gemara in Rosh Hashanah, from a memra, I believe it's a memra of Rav, what comes out from the Gemara in Rosh Hashanah is that, as we know, every time a carbon tzibur, not a carbon yachid, but a carbon tzibur, whenever a carbon tzibur was brought in the Beis Hamikdash, there was an accompanying shira. The Leviim sang shira over the bringing of a carbon. And the Gemara delineates the different shiras that were sung by the Leviim by different karbonis. And the Gemara asks, what was the shira of the carbon musaf of Shabbos? And the Gemara comes out that the shira of the carbon musaf of Shabbos was Parshas Hazinu. But they didn't lane the whole Parshas Hazinu by every carbon musaf Shabbos. Every week, they laned one section of Hazinu. And they broke it up into 6 kriyas. So they took the shira portion. When you look at Parshas Hazinu, from the first 6 aliyahs of Parshas Hazinu, from the beginning until Shvi, that's all the shira. That's all the shira part of Parshas Hazinu. After that is no longer shira. So in the Beis Hamikdash, they took that section, the shira section of Hazinu, they broke it up into 6 parts, and each Shabbos, for 6 Shabbos, each Shabbos they would lane another section over the carbon musaf of Shabbos, and then after 6 weeks, they would go over again. They would start again from the beginning. Says the Mechaber, Parshas Hazinu, Mechalkin Parshi Yosea, Kederech Shoyu Mechalkin Oisa B'Mikdash. We break up, when we lane Parshas Hazinu on Shabbos, we break up the aliyahs the same way they broke it up in the Beis Hamikdash for the shira of the Leviim by the carbon musaf of Shabbos. Shoyu Kairin Hashira Pamakas L'Sheishes Yemei Hashavua. They would break it up into 6 sections corresponding to the 6 days of the week, and they would lane one section each Shabbos. Okay, how is it to be broken up? Says the Mechaber v'Siman, the mnemonic is Haziv Loch. Now, ziv is a word that means the shine, the radiance. That's what ziv is. Ziv is radiance. Haziv, the radiance, loch, will be to you. Okay, we'll speak more about that in a moment. But in any case, what does this mnemonic stand for? Says the Mechaber, ha'azinu, The first aliyah begins with the pasuk ha'azinu, that's the hay. The second aliyah begins zechor, that's the zayin, zechor yabais oila bidu shtoi star vadar. The third aliyah starts with the yud. So ha, ziv, we did hay, zayin, out to yud. Yarkiveu al bamasei aretz, that's the beginning of the third aliyah. The fourth aliyah starts with a vav, vayar. The fifth aliyah starts lu chachmu. The sixth aliyah starts ki esa el shamayim yodi at soif hashira until the end of the shira section of Parshas Hazinu. Vashvi, and the seventh aliyah kairei misoif hashira at soif haparsha. Shvi, we go from the end of the shira to the end of the parsha. Says the Mishnah Berurah is cut yod alf. Mechalkid parsha yaseh kederech v'atam mipnei shem divrei techacha sheyichasru ha'am b'tshuva. The Rambam in Hilchas Tefillah brings up what I mentioned, that this is an aberration from the way we usually break up the aliyahs. And the Rambam explains it's because they felt it was appropriate to break up Hazinu that way. It was techacha to bring Klal Yisrael to tshuva. Fa'afil yesh chiyuvim lo yicholku ha'parsha yoser, says the Chavetz Chaim, he brings down for the Magen Avram, even if you have chiyuvim, you have yartzites, etc., we don't break it up any other way. We have to break up Hazinu, Haziv Loch. Ois kan yudbeis pamachas l'sheishes yimei hashavua v'yumechalken esol l'shisha chalakim l'sheishes yimei ha'maisa. The Beis Hamikdash, they broke up the shira component of Parshas Hazinu into 6 sections to correspond to the 6 days of the week. Ois kan yud gimel lu chachmu and ki esa. So, as I mentioned, the siman of Haziv Loch, the lamed and the ches, so that would be the beginning of Chamishi and the beginning of Shishi. What we said it is, what the Mechaber said is, Chamishi begins Lu Chachmu Yaskilu Zois, and Shishi would begin Ki Esa El Shamayim Yodi. That's the mnemonic of Loch, Lamed and Chaf. V'yesh Paiskim Shesayvim Detevas Loch Meramas Alulei Kas Oyev and Ki Yoden Hashem Amoy. So they break up the aliyahs differently. They do the lamed and the ches, referring to two different psukim. V'chein noihagim b'medina seinu, and the Chavetz Chaim says that is the minig in our regions. However, if you look in Shar Hatzion Ois Katan Zayin, v'yesh b'kayim shenoyegin kal Shulchan Aruch v'nara naharu pashte, there are those b'kayimos that are noyeg the way the Mechaber has it, that Chamishi is Luchachmu Yaskilu Zois, and Shishi is Ki Esa El Shamayim Yodi, which is the way most of our Chumashim have it, and I dare say that's the way we do it in most places. Ois Katan Yodalid, Shvi goes Misaif HaShira. Shvi begins from the end of the Shira component of Hazinu and continues to the end of the Parsha. Uvamakim Shemaisifin B'Shabbos Rashon Lahaisef Achar Aziv Loch Mi Vayavai Ulahalon. If you have to add aliyahs on Shabbos, you could make additions after Shvi. So you could make an achron, but you can't make any other interruptions during the Shira component. The Shira component has to be broken up as Haziv Loch. It can't be broken up any other way. Says the Ramah, Hagav Dafka b'Shabbos b'chalken aparshiyos. It is only on Shabbos that we are so concerned with breaking up Hazinu in the format of Haziv Loch. Ava b'mincha b'Shabbos v'sheni v'chamishi, but on Shabbos afternoon by mincha when we're going to lay in Hazinu, or on a Monday and a Thursday when we're laying Hazinu, ein lochish. We don't have to worry about how we break it up. We don't have to follow the format of Haziv Loch by Shabbos mincha and on Monday and on Thursday. For those of you who, enjoy these kind of things, or it's liman atayra, chas v'chalila, don't only do it for enjoyment purposes, but there's 2 very, very fascinating biurei halacha over here on Reish Peitas Amud Aleph, biur halacha dibra maskil b'midbar Sinai kaidem atzeres, and then the next paragraph, oid atik lifnei ha'kairei b'kitzer mibir hagra. And in these 2 biurei halacha, the Chavetz Chaim really goes through additional information on how the calendar is set. He shows us how to understand the variables of Cheshvan and Kislev. When are they Malei Chasar? When are they both Malei? When are they both Chasar? How do you know? Different variabilities of the calendar, exactly how we know when things should be which way. They're 2 fascinating biurei halachas, but I think that they are beyond the scope of what we do over here. Another interesting thing that comes out from the topic that we discussed today, very interesting question, and that is, when were the Parshias broken up? We have this assumption from the cradle that the Torah is broken up, Bereshis, Nayach, Lech Lecha, Vayera, based on what? If you look in the Sefer Torah, you don't find it that way. We have an allusion in the Sefer Torah, which is that we know that there is no gap in the Sefer Torah before Parshas Vayechi. And that's a source of great discussion, where the question is asked, why is Vayechi stuma? Why isn't there a gap before Vayechi? We know before, at the end of every Parsha, there's a gap before the beginning of the next Parsha. So we do know that with the exception of Parshas Vayechi, there is a gap in the Sefer Torah between the end of every Parsha and the beginning of the next Parsha. But there are other gaps in the Sefer Torah too. Those aren't the only psuchas and stumas anywhere in the Sefer Torah. There are other gaps in the Sefer Torah as well. So exactly when did the Torah get broken up into these individual parshios, Bereshis, Noach, Lech Lecha, etc., etc.? It's an interesting question. It's an interesting discussion. Maybe we'll go into it a little bit more in the next chair. In the meantime, thank you so much for joining me for Liman HaTorah. This of Liman HaTorah should be Megan against Klal Yisrael. The Rabban Shem should send Yeshua Sefuras Parnassah Sheduchim Tol Zinid. We should be Zaychet to see the BS called Tzedek V'Meher V'Yameinu. Amen. Be well.